Hello and welcome to Checking the Vitals, a podcast powered by Specialty Care. I'm Todd Schlosser, and joining me today is Dr. Quraishi, a pediatric intensivist and ECMO evangelist. In this episode, we discuss how he began his medical schooling at 16 in Mumbai, India, and transitions to America to continue his medical training. We also talk about how ECMO is changing and will continue to change healthcare. Enjoy the conversation. Well, Dr. Quraishi, thank you so much for joining us here on Checking the Vitals. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I like to start off with a similar question to all of our doctors, and that is, what was it that made you want to seek out a career in healthcare?
I think it's going to be a really boring answer. My dad was an anesthesiologist. I kind of saw, the kind of respect he got, how life was for him. Even though he worked really hard, I think I just saw the kind of respect that he got. And I kind of said, well, this is what life is. It's pretty satisfactory to me. And so that's how I went about trying to get into healthcare. Getting into healthcare was a whole different ballgame because I obviously went to medical school in India. Once, you're like, okay, this is good. But that was partly my reasoning to go in.
Awesome. So you had a mentor, a father figure, literally, who was already in the space. Did you ever shadow him in the hospital, or how did your love for that healthcare space come to be?
Well, I shouldn't say in the hospital, but we did a lot around. Like, he would come back and tell us about his cases and all the exciting things he did, and he would bring back certain mementos, and you'd be like, oh yeah, this looks so cool, or pictures, and then so you always had that. And of course, even after getting into medical school, dinner conversations were very interesting because my dad would be asking me about questions about medical school and what happened. And so you'd be telling him, he's like, well, I wouldn't do it that way. That doesn't seem right. So you always off of. And in many things also, later as an intensivist, I was like, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. And he's like, it doesn't sound right. You shouldn't do that. So today, I'll talk to him, he's like, well, this paper is new and it came out this time and you might want to read it before before it's too late. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go do that. So there's obviously we have two different fields now. I'm an intensivist and he's an anesthesiologist, but it's still very much so, a father figure and a mentor. Yeah. So, yeah. I
think anyone can relate with the fact that they might be in a different career than their father is, but their father's going to have notes on the decisions they've made with their life. So I think that's a very common thing you'll find in all different kinds of careers. Okay, you did mention that you went to medical school, I should say, was it Mumbai?
It was in Mumbai, yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that experience? I am super interested in how, if at all, med school is different in India versus in the U.S.
For one, we don't go through college. So you go to medical school right from high school. So on my first day of medical school, I was 16 years old. And
wow.
I turned 17 that year, but I was 16. And, there were a lot of my classmates who were 17, 18 because you go right from high school. So that's the start of it, is that you just get in when you're so much younger. Just looking back at it now, I'm like, well, I don't know if you really have the maturity at 16 to go through medical school, because
I'm sure some do. I don't think I did, but I'm sure some do.
No, it wasn't. I can talk for my own self, is that I don't think I had the maturity to go through it. And I think if I did it when I was 22, it probably would have been better, because it's just part and parcel of maturing, is that you respect what you're doing better. You've had some real world experience by then, so you overall do better. And so it's a little bit different, but our medical school is 5.5 years compared to 4 over here. So you spend a lot more time in medical school. So by the time you're out, you're about 21. So you're still pretty young, but at least you matured, or you had time to mature.
Yeah.
And so I came out at 21, and then I kind of did not want to stay in India for multiple other reasons. And then so the choice, where do I go, right? And I liked the medical system here better. I also think that the medical system in India is kind of based on the birth system, and so I wasn't too happy about that. So that was why we came here.
Yeah. So you came to I believe it was University of Buffalo School of Medicine, correct?
Well, I actually know. At first, I did a master's in public health. I had a little bit of, I'm done with medical school. I need some time, so I did a master's in the meanwhile in public health in Houston. For a few years, and then I moved to Buffalo after that.
So when did you decide to make your focus intensive care? Like, when did you decide that was for you?
Yeah, I know. So I had a really awesome mentor in the ICU. His name was Omar Al Ibrahim, and he's now at Duke, but he used to be at Buffalo, and he piqued my interest, not just in intensive care, but also in ECMO. And I think I can a lot of it I can lay it at his feet as to convincing me, as to mentoring me through fellowship, as to mentoring me through all kinds of ECMO education. And getting me into ELSO and a whole bunch of things. So, I think you always need that one big mentor in your life. And I had him. It was fantastic. And honestly, I'm lucky that I had him. So,
yeah, I find that when I talk to a lot of doctors, they often will cite their, what I will call medical mentor, with the reason they got into whatever specialty they're in. Like, whether it's the mentor's passion for it just was intoxicating, or they just had similar mindsets about medicine, and that's what got them into, in your case, intensive care. But for other people, it could be neurosurgery, could be cardiothoracic, could be whatever. It's that passion that pulls people in and makes them want to stay in that field. And I find that super interesting.
Yeah.
You also focus on pediatric intensive care, correct?
Yeah. Because I was a pediatrician before. So, I did residency in pediatrics and then pediatric intensive care. Yeah.
Okay. And was it the residency at the University of Buffalo School of Medicine where you were doing the pediatric care?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, both residency and fellowship was at University of Buffalo.
Okay. Oh, so did you do your fellowship in the same place?
Yeah. Because I wanted to stay with my mentor. So I just stayed off.
Yeah, that's not super uncommon either. If you can, I realize residency is somewhat of a match program, but fellowship, correct me if I'm wrong, you sort of can decide where you want to go. Now they have to pick you as well,
right?
But it's not a match, correct?
No, there is a match.
Okay.
Match you can, but what happens is you can get picked off early. So like I got picked off earlier, whereas Omar was like, "Do you want to do fellowship here?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to stay with you." So, so just I got picked off earlier, so I already knew that I was going to stay. So,
awesome. It also makes it easier just to stay where you are. You don't have to move across the country or whatever, or to another country as you did when you came for the your residency here. So let me ask. You finished your residency and fellowship mid 2010s. Was it like 2017? I think you then sort of started your own practice, or joined a practice, I should say. And what have you been focusing on in that time since you started that or joined that practice?
I think many things, but obviously your first year as an attending is just trying to get used to life and making decisions all by yourself without having a sounding board. So the first year, I wouldn't say we did very much. We did start the ECMO program in Albuquerque at Presbyterian, so that was one piece of it. But some of the wheels were already open, and my friend and great buddy Dr. Khan had already gotten that started. And so the wheels were already in motion. It wasn't a live program by the time I got there, but it became a live program once I got there.
Awesome.
So we already had, some things in motion. But after the first year, we kind of, we were doing that for the pediatric program, and we're like, well, we should do it for the adult program too. Why not, do adult ECMO too? And so that's when we started to delve into adult ECMO. And unbeknownst to us, we started to develop a program which was going to be very adult, ICU, leading ECMO heavy. And what happened, and so sort of taking the management away from the surgical team into the ICU team. And what happened was that, we did about a year and a half of that. And we were trying to, sort of convince the hospital about the need for ECMO. And of course, then COVID.
Were you explaining the need for COVID or the need for ECMO pre-COVID? So like before that all happened? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. And we also did, three of us actually did training to cannulate patients before COVID hit. So, which was very lucky for us because, we wouldn't know what to do if we hadn't done that before, because obviously nobody was doing any classes as soon as COVID started. So, we were already trained, and we had, attempted a couple of times before COVID hit to actually start cannulating patients. And so that was a thing. And we were in the midst of putting an ECPR program together and sort of developing protocols for that. So obviously the ECPR, which is ECMO CPR, is ECPR in case anybody's wondering.
Yeah, that was my next question.
You put a patient on ECMO while you're doing CPR. And I think the growth is going to be insane in that field. But really, I think that we were already in the middle of doing that. And then it turned out that Then COVID hit, and so we had to suspend our ECPR program, unfortunately, and then just concentrate on COVID in the meanwhile.
Sure. Can I ask a question about that though, while we're
Sure.
sort of in between, the chronological story here? ECMO CPR. What's the benefit of putting someone on ECMO while you're doing CPR? I'd imagine because they're seeing you and you're in intensive care, they're they're in a bad state, whatever that state is. But what's the advantage of putting them on ECMO while you're doing CPR?
Well, so they're essentially a patient who's dead and have been brought in doing CPR. They're doing CPR on them, and is that that the CPR is not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to get what we call return of spontaneous circulation. So if you're not going to be able to do that, then all you want to do is buy that patient time to figure out why they arrested in the first place, and that's what ECMO does. It gives you time, or it buys you time to figure out what's wrong, and you may never be able to, which is very rare. But it does give you time, and a lot of times, especially in younger patients, it turns out it's a reversible cause. So if you give them enough time with ECMO, the reversible cause goes away, whether, they need a cath after and you put in some stents and they're fine afterwards, or it was a drug overdose and, that's turned around now and, they're starting to wake up. And so a lot of times it's a reversible cause. And so once you give enough time for the reversible cause to take effect, then the patient may be fine.
That's amazing to me. So like a patient comes in, heart is not beating. You're doing CPR to sort of simulate that and then put them on ECMO so their blood gets oxygenated and starts to circulate through their body. And you are able to then, it buys you time to sort of do what you do as a doctor and, figure out what is going on, what caused the stoppage of the heart, and then try to resolve that issue. Like that to me is amazing, just from where we were 10 years ago. Like that is someone coming in with their heart stopped. I mean, it wasn't that there was nothing you could do. It was just time was so important at that point. And not that right now it isn't important, but the fact that ECMO can buy you more of those precious minutes is amazing to me.
Oh, yeah. And I shouldn't say me or any one of us as physicians, because it requires a village. It's all of these ECMO specialists who are so well trained to do this, because time is of the essence. Is EMTs out in the field recognizing that this patient could be an ECMO candidate. It's ER nurses, ER physicians, participating in this whole process. It literally takes a village. I kid you not. And so every person is on the same page. But I think if everybody is and trained and well informed, then we have room to maybe convert these patients, some of them, not all of them, into patients that may be what we call quote unquote salvageable, because you might be able to get them to a place where they might do okay. Yeah.
And I know, just because patient outcomes is what everyone is trying to improve, and that's the most important thing going on in the hospital is positive patient outcomes, right? And everyone's working towards that goal. I'd imagine whether you can save someone or not, you're always going to do as much as you can to get a positive outcome. So, it may feel like a moot point in the moment, but you're going to give that family every option they have to get that person back in their life,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I can't think of a more high stakes job than you have chosen, which I'm so grateful that there are people who can do that. I'm not sure I have enough calm under pressure to be able to do that sort of a job. So I commend you on that ability. But man, that's got to be a wild ride when it's happening.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and this is so funny because a lot of my work now is not involved with ECPR. I think, we have a great ICU team now who responds to all of those. And part of it is, there's a team and there's a person who's responsible for doing that, and they do it, and they do a phenomenal job. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Okay, so I would like to talk to you about, obviously we sort of left off chronologically with you trying to convince the hospital pre-COVID that ECMO is important. Obviously, we know through ECMO or through COVID, ECMO became very important. So I'd imagine that your sort of ECMO evangelism beforehand made your hospital way more prepared for, I'd imagine, the workload going way up under COVID. I know it did in almost every hospital around the US. So I'd imagine yours was no exception to that.
Oh, absolutely. And, it wasn't just me by myself. I had two other partners. Both of them were fantastic and probably shared the same enthusiasm for ECMO. And so, when there's three people who keep going at it from different ways, it definitely makes you better prepared. And it also brings new ideas in, which,
people think differently. And, I'd imagine that with three I'm assuming when you say there are three people, you mean three other doctors?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking at the same problem, but your brain may think of it a different way. And you have maybe 2-3 different solutions to every problem. That's only going to make the innovations faster. And I'd imagine that a lot of that happened during COVID just because of the amount of people that were on COVID. And I know I remember reading stories about, people converting ECMO machines that were only supposed to be used for 2 people are now being like 4 people, and safe ways of doing that and expanding the capacity and and other innovations that came down as well during that time. Did any of that happen where you were at your hospital there in Albuquerque?
Yeah, no, we did. Those 2 years brought us forward by 10, and I think even more. We don't know, because the innovations that happened was we kind of ran out of ECMO machines because we're like, well, that's all we got. We don't have anything more.
Yeah.
And so how do we figure out how to do more? How do we figure out how to ration? How do we figure out how to get more machines? So, we started to borrow some, then we started to rig up whatever, we had in the hospital to try and offer more. And unfortunately, at the end of it all, even with all of that rigging and renting stuff, we realized that staffing is going to be our major problem. And so it ended up being limited because of staffing, which was pretty much what it was for everybody. I mean, there were times when we got calls from people from all around the country, and they were like, we got a plane waiting on the tarmac for our loved one. If you guys even have one room to get a patient. And we're like, we're sorry. We just, it's just insane over here. And as much as possible, in New Mexico, our responsibility is to New Mexicans. Unfortunately, if we had a room for you, we would have, but we just don't, unfortunately. So
yeah. I mean, that makes sense. You are full. If you had room, you would take, and you just couldn't do that. Yeah, I completely understand that. Although that is I'd imagine, heartbreaking conversation to have with a loved one of a patient who needs, urgent medical care. But as we talked about before, patient outcomes being the most important. You don't want to lower the possibility of a positive patient outcome for the people who are currently there in your hospital to try and bring on someone else. And you may turn one negative outcome into 2 by doing that. So you do have to sort of weigh that. Again, another reason why I would not enjoy your job.
Yeah, because I have to say that was a very non-enjoyable part of our job. Even though we were taking care of sick patients, I think we liked doing that. It kind of there was a sense of purpose, which really. But obviously, that was the part that we really didn't want to take care of. Yeah. And we were always happy somebody else was doing it and not us. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, but because of the training that you have, where your skills are best suited is in the patient care, not necessarily coordinating patient care, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I definitely understand that. Yeah. And honestly, that's where you and the other doctors that are there should be, right? Taking care of patients.
Yeah. And to bring us back to the original question was, what kind of innovation? And the other is, there was a lot of innovation that happened during that 2 years. We started doing things that we never thought we would do. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of it was don't move the patient too much. Don't, don't wake them up too much. Let them be completely sedated. And we kind of put all of that to the wayside. We're like, no, the only way that these people are surviving are we have to wake them up. We have to take their breathing tubes out. We have to make them participate in physiotherapy. We have to make them participate overall in their care. And we have to be used to doing ECMO for months and months and months, which we never did before. I mean, these were all things that, we came through in the last 2.5 years.
Okay. Let me ask this question then. So when you get into COVID and, you're using ECMO so much more, how do you come to the decision of, hey, maybe the standard operating procedures are not the best operating procedures? Wow. So, and not that you throw the book out, but how do you sort of, okay, let's start fresh, look at this with fresh eyes, and then build better standard operating procedures? How do you go about that?
I wish there was a fancy answer to that. But the very unfortunate answer to that is when all your patients die, right? So, and all of them are realize that whatever you're doing is not working. So you have to do something. Yeah. And it wasn't just based on our experience. We were part of the ECMO card study, which was, multiple centers across the world who were doing this. And so we had an insight into what other people were doing. And so we looked into it and then we talked to multiple people across the country. And some people had better outcomes. Some people had worse outcomes than us. So we talked to people, figured out, well, this is working, this is not working. We should probably not be doing that. We should be doing this. And so it was a combination of being part of studies, talking to other people, and unfortunately, just all of our patients dying. So we realized, well, we got to do something different. There's no way we can continue to do what we were doing and what was traditionally taught to us. So we have to evolve.
Yeah, which is always going on in medicine. I understand. I mean, no one's ever complacent with, okay, we figured out how to do this kind of transplant. We're never going to change that. That's never the way that happens, because new technologies come in like minimally invasive or whatever. And then it sounds like a similar thing happened here with ECMO, where, it wasn't used as much as it was during COVID. And then during COVID gave the opportunity to sort of revisit some of the operating procedures. And also you mentioned, groups coming together in these studies. And by groups, I mean hospitals, I'd imagine, coming together and sort of sharing information, which is one thing that I think healthcare does better than other industries. And I think it's because, people's lives are on the line. And in other industries, you may have a better car battery or whatever, like lives aren't on the line for that. Right. But I think it's awesome that when you have these better operating procedures or what you think might be better, you open up to everyone else and say, hey, we figured this out. Patients do better if you do this. And you give that information away just to everybody.
Right.
So is that something that is very common on a normal day in like the healthcare industry, or was that special for COVID?
No, that's very common. So, we're lucky to be in an industry where thankfully we don't ever have to worry about where's my next patient going to come from, which is essentially, if I'm selling coffee and there's a guy right opposite the street who's selling coffee, well, that's competition for me. But if there's a hospital right across the street, they may not be competition for me, or, because there's enough business for all of us. There's enough oxygen to go around. So it really is, and so we are all very good about sharing. I think most of us are scientists at the very young, at least very deep down. And so we are happy to share any information we can with anybody. And which is, and I think, that is what we're doing, or at least what I'm doing with a group of people now, is that we're trying to educate everybody about A, what ECMO is, B, how do you run ECMO, how do you start programs, and how do you how do you bring yourself up to standards and maintain those? And that is, part of it is, a lot of it is basically just sharing, and we're happy to do that. It's, we don't look at it as competition for sure.
That's awesome. And honestly, I love that. I'm sure that'll always continue, but that's, I think, very important to create a space where innovation can happen most quickly. And I realize that by design, the medical space, because you are dealing with people's lives, innovation sometimes seems like it's moving slowly because you have to be careful. You can't just throw anything at the wall and hope something sticks, because these are people's lives. So can you talk to a little bit about those measures that you have in place to ensure best patient care while also trying to innovate?
Yeah, and a lot of us will be part of some sort of quality initiative, and a lot of quality initiatives are mostly national, if not international. ECMO, we're lucky that we actually have an international body, which is called ELSO, and they set standards as to what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, and they've done a phenomenal job about maintaining a registry. And a registry is basically every patient that goes on ECMO and what we do with them. And we have access to, as any center that participates in putting information in the registry, we have access to other people's information. Obviously all the data, all the patient information is redacted from it, but we have access.
I'd imagine that's a huge data set.
It is. It can be used for multiple reasons. And so we can use that. And so we can compare ourselves to other people who are similar size, who are bigger than us, who are smaller than us, as far as we're meeting those metrics or not. And many other specialties are coming to it slowly, but they haven't been able to do it at the scale that ELSO has done. And I think mostly because it was a young field, and they developed it really well right at the start, and kind of recognize that this, because we don't have the numbers in the country, we should probably just do it internationally. And so it started out, becoming an international, body early on. And so then, now we have information from Australia, we have information from Switzerland. It's unbelievable. Like, you could get information from anywhere you want it, which is what we want. Yeah. So we can compare ourselves as far as metrics go to other places that are similar to us. So that's how we maintain our own standards.
Awesome. So I have a question around how you start an ECMO program, and I realize that you're experienced in that, so I feel comfortable asking you. So if a hospital is currently considering starting an ECMO program, what are some things that are involved in getting one from no ECMO program to literally up off the ground, actually taking ECMO patients?
No, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, Todd, because I think that number one, you have to have buy-in. And I don't mean buy-in, physician buy-in.
Sure.
I mean buy-in from the administration, because it's a big investment up front. And I mean monetary investment. I also mean time investment. It's going to require somebody to be the champion for ECMO, and that is not a physician that works in the background to make the money come from somewhere. And thankfully, that was not my job, and it has never been my job. But you do need some buy-in from the administration, and then you go about looking at what and how your volume is going to come in from. So are you going to be mostly patients that are going to have sick lungs? Are you going to be mostly ECPR? Do you have a cath lab? Do you have surgeries? Are those patients going to be put on ECMO or not? Are you sending away patients that you may have been able to put on ECMO? Are patients dying in your units that could have been put on ECMO? So I think you look at those numbers and sort of get an estimate as to how many patients you think you might need. Or you might get in a year.
Sure.
And then you go out and buy the machines that come with it. And then, after that, it's a question of staffing those, because every ECMO pump needs a specialist to take care of that pump, not the nurse, or the respiratory therapist, but an actual ECMO specialist. And that's where, you can either outsource that or build your own team. And I think outsourcing that, you can basically go to their company. So Specialty Care, for example, is one of those companies. And there are, 2 or 3 other companies in the market that also do the exact same thing. Or you build your own team. The difference between the two is building your own team will require a few years, and you will require, you will require a lot of buy-in from your administration, a lot of buy-in from the physicians to train this team. If you go with a company that does this all day, then it's quick. You can start an ECMO program in 6 months, honestly. Yeah. As long as you're willing to put in the amount of money that it takes to start it off. So that's the 360-degree view. I mean, there's a bunch of minutia that go into it, but
I'm sure if we wanted to talk about everything that came up while you guys were starting it, I'm sure we could talk for 6 months about that, because I'm sure every day was a new challenge or a new problem to solve or a new patient amounts to forecast or that kind of stuff, right? Because in order to get administration involved, you probably have to be able to make a case for how this is obviously good for patient care. I feel like that's going to be the easiest case to make, but also why should we as a hospital do this or provide this service? And in reality, that's going to be both it'll serve patients in this area, help us get better outcomes, but it's also going to be a financial decision because it is such a big investment with equipment and training, and then hiring of either, like a specialty care type company that can come in that's already trained and knows how to do it, or if you're going to invest in the actual training of, new people and make them ECMO specialists. So it is quite an investment. And I think that people like you who know the space real well, know what the investment is. I think people like me who don't, we only go to the hospital when we're sick, that is something that I think is foreign to us, that we wouldn't necessarily understand. So I think that's great insight.
It's so crazy. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's so crazy.
You're good.
I think that the hospital and the administration doesn't see that eventually, after you put your initial investment, eventually it's actually financially profitable for you to have an ECMO program. It makes money. And that's just how it's designed. That it's supposed to make you money in the end, because you do put a lot of work into it. But the initial investment is something that is very prohibitive for people, so they worry. There's ways to reduce those initial investments, and I can certainly talk about that for a while too. That how do you reduce your initial investment and sort of reduce the risk for you as a hospital? But there's there are many ways to do that. But in the end, it is a profitable venture financially, because we have to understand that everything has a financial aspect to it, and it is a profit at the very end of it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's not unique to healthcare. I mean, all innovation in all industries is, I think, because we live in a capitalistic society, and, it has to have that financial component so people will make the investments to make the innovation happen. I feel like that is not foreign to people who even work outside of healthcare. That makes sense to me. And I don't work at all inside the hospital, right? I do have a few questions about, because you mentioned in the past sort of 2 years under COVID, you've made what you would estimate as like about 10 years, maybe 5, 10 years of, innovation in just that small amount of time. And it's not that we're completely done with COVID. It's, that it's sort of trailing off, and it seems like we may have it for a long, long time, and we get it like a yearly shot from what I've been hearing from the CDC, which, I mean, I already get the flu shot once a year. So, that's fine. As long as I don't get sick, that's all I care about. But moving forward, how do you continue that level of innovation? Is that even possible?
No, that's a good question. I think, innovation comes from two things. One is endeavor. The other one is, desire. And I think the endeavor and desire were both there during COVID from multiple people. And I think, now, unfortunately, it's going to go back to people like me who are evangelists when it comes to ECMO. So it will come from that. And thankfully, there's a bunch of people like us, right? So if you ever go to an ELSO conference, you'll see a whole bunch of us. But thankfully, there's enough. But it comes from that, and the other one that it comes from is an injection of cash that needs to come into it. And we had both of those in ECMO. We had people who were passionate. During the pandemic, we had people who were passionate, and then we had people who were willing to inject the cash into it. So where it's going to come from now is going to be bigger centers who will be willing to innovate, and it's going to come from national meetings and somebody doing something different, and for most people to be like, oh yeah, that's that sounds great. That's how we should do it. But it will slow down. There's no question about it. Yeah, the innovation will probably go back to what it used to be.
Yeah. Which, I mean, you were making innovations in the space before COVID. We talked about a little bit of that. So it's not that COVID's going to go, or it's not that ECMO is going to go away. It's just it'll sort of, I'd imagine it'll go back to sort of a regular innovation type cycle, like other surgeries or techniques have done, since they weren't necessarily impacted by COVID. They probably stayed at that level. So because you have been for a long time, even before COVID, an ECMO evangelist, how do you see that moving forward? I'd imagine that you're not sort of done with it. You're going to stay in that capacity. So what are you planning on doing going forward?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I think, we've started a group of physicians, have started a group that goes out and helps, hospitals understand how to start an ECMO program, how to get things moving. And then sort of advise them as to how to start certain programs. For example, an ECPR program, if a hospital is interested in doing that, we try and advise them as to how to do that. It is my life's mission to make sure that every hospital will be able to do ECMO eventually, because I think that it is becoming easier to put patients on ECMO. And it should be easy, because it should be available in every hospital that a patient walks into. It should almost be like how you have an ER in every hospital. It should be like you should have ECMO in every hospital, because it really is something that anybody can do. Anybody, any physician, any nurse, any RT should be able to at least talk about ECMO and be able to put their patients on ECMO. And that's my last goal, is that I hope that every hospital that I can walk into can do ECMO. So whether they keep the patients after that, the idea should be they should be able to put patients on ECMO because that's stabilizing their life. And then after that, whether they want to keep the patient or not, that's up to them, because they're going to have to put an investment as far as that is concerned. And then, so my hope is that I can teach people how to cannulate patients for ECMO through the coming few years. I can teach people about ECMO in general, and then, obviously do advanced ECMO teaching if I can. But that really is part and parcel of what I want to do in the future.
Yeah. So where do you see the field of ECMO sort of moving in the next few years, maybe even 10 years out?
Yeah, and that is my thought, is that I think what will happen is we will be able to put patients on ECMO in more and more places, and then we'll move them into more specialized centers. And I think that is the part of the field that needs to evolve more. For example, in Europe, they're putting patients on ECMO in the field. And, there's a famous picture of this ECMO team putting a patient on ECMO at the Louvre in Paris. So, it's insane.
Wow.
So, we in America, in North America, are nowhere close to that. So the Europeans have us beat on that. And so that is the hope, that we as Americans can have that facility available to us, that, hey, you know what? If I'm walking around in Costco and I collapse, I know somebody's going to put me on ECMO at some point, because that's how the field needs to evolve. And it needs to evolve to that point in the coming few years, because we've made the innovation now and we've moved the field so far ahead during these 2.5 years. We should not lose ground and just continue to evolve into that. And hopefully we can.
So can I ask a question about how Europe has done that? Are the machines just more mobile than other machines, or do they just put ECMO machines sort of in ambulances or in like life flight helicopters?
Yeah, they'll put the machines in ambulances, in helicopters, in jets, so you can do that too.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and it's insane. And the machines are small enough. We use the same kind of machines. I think that where they've evolved better is two things. Number one is they have better organization of teams, mostly because a lot of them have national healthcare. So they've invested in that. The national healthcare system have invested in those teams, and so they have better teams than we do, because we're a bunch of hospital systems who are separate and don't really collaborate, whereas like these national systems have really collaborated well to develop these teams. And then the number two thing, very unfortunately for us, is that we are a very litigious society compared to the Europeans. And so we've, unfortunately, it would be hard for us to do that, in a large scale like they have. But I think we can get there. It's just that somebody needs to go out and advocate for this. Is like, hey, listen, if you try to cannulate somebody in the middle of Costco and it doesn't go right, that's just unfortunate, because that patient is going to die anyways. And we're going to need to bring more and more people on board, and then sort of educate our judicial system and our government systems that that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're sort of the man for the job, and it sounds like you have a few doctor friends there at your hospital who also are sort of joining you on this journey.
No, not just in my hospital, in my friends group too. I have a bunch of friends who believe the same way that I do, and so together all of us were like, well, this is something that we have to advocate for, because this is where we should go. Because there's no reason why we should be behind Europe, and there should be no reason why we should be behind Australia. And where we are, very unfortunately, we are. So
okay. So I normally close with one final question.
Yeah.
I think I may modify it a bit, and I normally ask, if you were talking to someone, maybe like a mentee of yours, about going into intensive care as a focus, like as a residency program, maybe, what would your sales pitch for that be? But I'd like to change it to, if you were talking to a doctor who was considering joining your ECMO evangelism, what would your sales pitch for that be?
Well, I think the sales pitch is that you will get to take care of the sickest of the sick, and and there is something that there's a satisfaction that comes from seeing those patients turn around and come back to see you. When they walk in your ICU or they walk in your hospital, on their own 2 feet without anything else, it is the greatest satisfaction that you can have. And we use that, we use those stories to convince people that, hey, listen, it's worth it, because look at this person. They are exactly the same. I give the example of, there are 2 big examples in my life. One is there was a physician during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he was on the ECMO circuit for a long time. And he is now a practicing physician again. And he came back, he's come back multiple times to visit us, but it really has made a big difference in our life. As far as being able to see one of our own surviving through the pandemic because of all of the stuff that we all did, and coming back to see us and being able to practice and help other people. I think that is a very big thing. And the other one is this kid that I had during my training, who was on for the longest period of time. And she survived, this whole thing. And I still hear back from her every now and then saying that, and it was my first day as an ICU fellow that we put this ECMO. And so she has essentially, me going through medicine and her going through her life has grown all the way. And I still hear back from her every now and then. And it's these stories that will, make your life very, fulfilling. And that is what it is that it's a fulfilling life as an ECMO physician when you come back to it. And that's the reason why we do this work. Is it's not easy, but it is. It's so fulfilling. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, not to quote JFK, but like the reason we do it is because it is hard, because it is difficult. I mean, he was talking about going to the moon, but like it can be said about many different industries, and this is definitely one of them. You don't go into healthcare because you want an easy life. You go into healthcare because it is a difficult job and you want to help people. I heard someone refer to specifically medical research as compassion science. And I've really enjoyed that because you have to be sort of a compassionate person to go into this in general, whether you're working in the sterile processing unit or as a surgeon in the OR. You have to have a level of compassion for that. And I just commend everyone who works in that space because it's something that I think struggle with, not the compassion part, but being able to do that job that is so high stakes every day, I think would wear on me.
Yeah. But no, we thrive on it. So I think, it's just a different personality. Yeah. But,
absolutely. Well, Dr. Quraishi, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Checking the Vitals. I very much appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.